G'day and welcome to the Off-Chain Podcast. Don here with you. Great to be joined today by Charlotte Kapoor, Head of Innovation at Cronos Labs. Charlotte spent many years at Outlier Ventures before joining Cronos late last year. She's got a wealth of experience working with startups at both OV and Cronos' Accelerator programs. And we're excited to talk to her about her experiences, what it's been like working in Web3 through a pretty tumultuous time, what it's like working in Web3 as a woman, and how innovation's playing out in 2023 with so many new developments in technology. Charlotte is right at the forefront of innovation. She knows what it takes to be a successful startup founder in 2023. So let's dive into our conversation with Charlotte Kapoor. Charlotte, thank you for joining us today. Tell us, how'd you get started in Web3? What does your origin story look like?
Sure. So I got started in the space probably 2017. So fairly early. I kind of just got really interested in everything that was happening at that time. I think there was, the markets picked up and suddenly there was this huge buzz and this craze that I just wanted to be a part of. And at the time I was working in advertising, and I kind of was actually specifically working in a music spin out for Sony. And I could just really quickly see the use case of the technology and how it could just disrupt that industry. And I think that just kind of just pushed me towards wanting to be a part of it in any capacity I could. So I really just kind of scoured my network for anyone that was doing anything vaguely related, and I kind of just badgered them. That was really my honest way in. And eventually, there was a chap who was a partner at Outlier Ventures, which is one of the largest Web3 accelerators in the space. Now, although at the time it was more of a kind of collection of partners and individuals who were kind of actively investing and just were really interested and really wanted to like me, had the mindset of just wanted to be part of it and work with early stage founders doing disruptive and interesting things. So I badgered them and said, look, I want to work with you. I want to work in the space. I'm really interested in being a part of it in any way I can. This is my background. I'll and they were like, well, we don't really have a role for you right now. We really want people who are investing, and that went on for a couple of months. And then eventually they said, you know what, look, we'd love to have you part of the organization. We'll figure it out. You're clearly keen, you're clearly engaged. And that was really the start of my journey into the space. And I spent a good 5 years working with them on every kind of 360, working with teams very holistically, thinking about how we could find a place for a lot of early stage teams within the landscape, or what their edge was. And I suppose my specific role in the early days, it was particularly around the positioning, the narrative of those projects, helping them find a really strong message that would resonate with their audience. And in the first instance, that was often helping them find investment and articulate it to audiences that one would be users, but also I suppose would also be able to inject capital so that they could scale and grow. And then the last couple of years I spent at Outlier, I was doing, I think, just born out of working with teams, particularly on their community building and their narrative. I found myself working with them a lot on token launches. So teams that had gone through our accelerator and then were looking to kind of grow even further and build communities. And they were coming back to me and saying, we want to launch a token. We want to really scale the business. So I was working with them on every facet of the token launch and the value accrual of the project for the last couple of years. And then more recently, I've joined the Cronos team, the Cronos Labs team, which is the accelerator arm of the Cronos chain. So yeah, I can talk a bit more about that, but that's kind of like a early entry into the space and to today.
Yeah, right. So I mean, that's quite a long time to be in Web3. Like you say, 2017, back in 2017, it didn't feel like that was early getting in. But now, back in 2017, feels like a very long time to be in the industry, especially having been with Outliers, like I say, who are now one of the most respected, players in the industry in the world, really, which is really great. And so to see you, to hear that you've kind of grown with them, but also kind of helped them grow as well, and kind of form out what that looks like for them. Community building, token launching, value accrual based out of your background in messaging and advertising, essentially. What does it look like to go from working on messaging and advertising 6 or 7 years in an industry and now being the head of innovation for a layer one accelerator lab? That's a big deal, actually, and especially one that's associated with one of the biggest players, like exchanges in cryptocurrency in the world, or just in Web3 in the world, really.
Yeah, no, and thank you. I appreciate that. And I think, I feel a bit like that. I feel like a lot of that experience has kind of set me up to work with Cronos and everything that I'm doing now in a really great way. And like you touched on there, I feel like it's a bit full circle in the sense that, the core value proposition of Cronos is, effectively, it's an EVM built with a Cosmos SDK, but ultimately what's really exciting about it for me is that the access to this awesome ecosystem of 80 million active users. And I think, it's almost like actually what I started off doing was kind of communicating and finding ways to resonate with actually a very retail, very consumer-based audience. And so that's actually one of the reasons that I was really interested in whatever thing that the Cronos Labs team were doing, and finding ways to really effectively onboard non-crypto native consumers, is because that actually really plays to my natural skill set and my experience. So yeah, no, I appreciate that. But yes, certainly it's been an interesting ride. And I think particularly working with teams specifically on their token and the finding utility and I suppose like token market fit was really fascinating and just such an amazing learning experience for me. And, it's still very much learning. I think just every week, every year that goes by, there's just such an incredible array of new ways to explore and experiment with how that value accrues and how token economies can really thrive and find real roles and real, I suppose, usefulness in all types of people's lives, rather than just it being a very like sector specific trend or phenomenon.
Yeah, so I mean, you just touched on it a little bit there, but what have you learned? Like, what are some of the key learnings, having been with an accelerator for a number of years, really seeing the whole industry grow, not just that company grow, and now being at another accelerator, one where you are like a big fish in a big pond? What do you learn? What have you learned? What do you know? What are kind of the things that you're looking for about teams? So people who listen and watch this podcast are people who want to invest money, so venture capitalists especially, or angel investors. But we have heaps of startup founders as well. And so for all of these kinds of people, I'm sure they'll be very interested to hear some of your learnings, having worked in that accelerator environment for so long.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think the greatest learning, having worked with probably upwards of, between 50 and 100 teams over the last 5-6 years, working in Web3, all early stage, is like, ultimately it really is founder first. It really is, so much of it is about that individual, that founding team, and their ability to solve problems, their tenacity, their and I think just their kind of shared vision, and them wanting to solve a real pain point. I think that's really at the crux of the biggest learnings for me. It's like, how do we find founders and how do we help them solve that like really clear and really acute pain for users or consumers in the space, and how do we onboard how do we onboard them to those products and those ideas in a way that's going to be straightforward and transparent. So I think like that's the big thing for me is like is the founder piece. But then there's a whole bunch of other learnings, like more specifically to the accelerator space that I can kind of expand on if that's helpful.
Yeah, well, first, let's pull apart some of those things. So everything rising and falling on the founding team, absolutely very important. Talk to me about tenacity. That was the first thing that you identified. What does that look like?
Yeah.
Is that something that's just innate? Is that something that you can imbue or develop in people? How do you know when someone has it? What does it look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, look, the honest truth is you never really know. And because I don't think anyone truly knows, like when they're faced with like real challenges or different roadblocks or barriers to progress, no one really knows how they're going to handle that. But I suppose there are kind of trends and themes that we see. And I think the reason I think it's so critical, it's really important for all founders of any industry vertical, right? But I think in Web3, particularly looking back over the last couple of years, like it's so volatile, and there are so many macro events that impact founding teams and their projects that they just are really completely out of their hands. And I would say, you know, because it's such a nascent space and there is so much happening that is, you know, like everywhere at 24 hours in such a, you know, and the beauty of it is totally decentralized, but there is, by the nature of that, there is more of a lack of control, right? And so I think for founders working in the space, it's just having that resiliency to kind of be like, oh, okay, cool, we're still on a network that's no longer there, right? Where do we go? Or, you know, like all sorts of challenges that happen, you know, or my treasury is now imploded, there's all sorts of things that, you know, are just kind of like colossal, like really kind of would wipe out teams if they let it. And so I think that's why for me it's just such an important part of a trait that I would look for in really strong teams.
So it's something that you're seeing in the teams themselves that helps to identify this is a team worth working with or worth investing in or working for, I should say. Are there teams that perhaps look good, or their technology is really good, or their demo is great, or they have backing already, and you think, oh, they don't have that tenacity aspect? Can you build that into a team? Is that possible? Can you do it?
Yeah, I think I think it's one of the things that we do in the Accelerator, right, is up front, right, there's probably 50 to 100 mentors that sit in and around the ecosystem of Cronos, right? And they range from investors who will have a really great kind of high level overview of the landscape, and you know will be brilliant at being able to just be very insightful about the space for founding teams. Also founders who have kind of been through battles and have been through those scars and can share those learnings, and also like enterprise, right? So who also come at it from how does enterprise integrate into the space? How do we work with early stage innovation? And I think one of the things that we try to do during the Accelerator is really give teams and participants like a real kind of 360 view of all of the different mindsets, the different personas, and the different perceptions that not just from different industry backgrounds will have, but also different jurisdictions, and they're coming at problems in different ways. So I suppose can you build that tenacity in? A lot of that is going to be by the nature of the fact that they want to be a founder in Web3. For me, that already says a lot, right? But then I suppose as part of the program, we really try to provide that rigor and that framework for them to be able to test and learn and to iterate on their ideas in a way that is constructive and also really, really feeds into kind of diversity of thought and experience, so that they at least have visibility of some of the challenges and some of the barriers that they might potentially face in building and scaling their product.
Yeah, all right. I mean, that's really insightful, Charlotte. You spoke about solving a real problem, or even the team being able to solve problems, but also their project or product looking to solve a real pain point, a real problem. One of the things that we found at faculty over the last couple of years has been so many projects coming in. Well, we're going to be this, but on the blockchain, but not actually solving any real problems. And we've seen hundreds or probably thousands of these kinds of companies. What's the ratio, or can you give a percentage, just anecdotally, how many projects that come across your desk do you think are actually solving those pain points with blockchain technology or with a Web3 outlook?
Yeah, I think that's a really fair question, right? I mean, we had for the latest accelerator, and I suppose worth saying that we have the accelerator, we also have grants program. We work with early stage teams in lots of different capacities, but maybe just to answer your question as a kind of example, for the latest accelerator cohort, we probably had just shy of 350 applications, right? And there's a really broad array of teams doing all sorts of different things, but it's really obvious when a team is doing something different, right? And there's some true innovation, right? Because it really does stand out. And I think just by the nature of the space, you can very easily fork other protocols. You can fork ideas. You can go, I don't like how they're running their governance, or I don't like this aspect of their proposition, but I really like the tech. Cool, I'm going to take it and I'm going to do it myself. And that can work, right? That there is many, many great projects that have done that. But I suppose for us, we're looking for projects that are providing solutions to in a new way, in a new and innovative way, because that's more likely to get traction and really cut through to a user. Because I think that's really, if you can really, and then that comes from testing and learning and speaking to your audience and really figuring out what the actual challenge is. Because sometimes you find that, you think it's one thing. It's payments take so long, and I wouldn't use this network because of X, Y, and Z. But actually, when you peel back the layers, it might not be the timescale. It's actually people are happy to wait if they felt that transaction was safe and secure. Or they're actually worried about is that time delay implies that there's that it's actually not secure, it's not safe. So sometimes it's really wrestling with what the problem is and where the pain is in order to be able to solve it. But yeah, I think there is a very large majority which are forks or doing things which are kind of cross-pollinating what is already there rather than coming up with a new idea. And I think that's what we're really looking for.
Well, so out of those 350 applications, how many actually get accepted into the accelerator?
So we choose between 6 and 8 teams. So that's kind of like the that's the plan. I mean, I would say we are in the kind of throes of finalizing the makeup of the cohort at the moment, and it is really challenging. We've had so many brilliant applications and so many fantastic founders, and so drawing it down to that number is hard. I really struggle with that, but yeah, that's the plan, is to have 6 to 8 so that you can give teams a really kind of white glove service, right? You can really support them both in a group setting, but also lots of one-to-one support, lots of mentoring. And ultimately, I do think that to some degree, the more bespoke and the more kind of individual hands-on support we can give teams, that there is real benefit in that. Certainly at early stage, there's lots of principles, there's lots of information sharing, and also collective discussion that is really useful to do as a contingent, as a cohort. But equally, having a really small group does allow us to provide lots of bespoke and specialized insight and ideas for individual teams and founders.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, one of the things we haven't even really spoken about yet is what does an accelerator do, and what benefit do they have for the projects that come into the accelerator? How has the accelerator landscape changed over the last couple of years? Can you maybe, especially for those founders, watching, what does an accelerator even do? What's the benefit to those projects? And what are they giving up for the benefit of being in a cohort like that?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I think the accelerators have been around for a long time, right? And there are if you search like early stage accelerator, there are literally thousands around the world, right? That provide support in all sorts of different ways, and so there isn't really a one size fits all explanation. But what I would say is. Sorry, the aim certainly of our accelerator is to kind of support teams in that. They've got that some idea of product market fit. They've got that kind of early signs of actually this could be something awesome. How do we look at the opportunities? How do we look at the potential weaknesses, and how do we kind of really capitalize on the opportunity? And how do we help those teams go from sometimes it's 0 to 1, often it's 1 to 5, and sometimes it can be like 1 to 100. It really does depend on the team and the stage that they're at, but really it's just helping them accelerate growth. At its core, that is what we're doing, and there's lots of ways that teams get from. I kind of see that there's this spectrum or this journey that every founder goes on, from kind of like having an idea all the way to having like a fully fledged capitalized business. And there's lots of ways that you can get there. But what I think accelerators do really well is just kind of ramp up that speed, that timeline, and allow founders to iterate, get feedback, build a network just in such a quick and effective manner. And so at a high level, that's ultimately what we're trying to do for teams in the Cronos ecosystem that are building in a way that is going to deliver value for the network.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, so for the ones that do, say, eventually get into the Cronos Accelerator, are they decided upon by a committee? Are there particular recommendations? Are they weighted? Is it just you in a room with 350 applications and you come out 2 weeks later and you've got your list? How does that work for you?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it's really important to have different minds, different experiences, different biases, and both in the application and the review process, but also in the accelerator itself, right? So it really is mirrored for us. So, and maybe just to expand briefly on the types of individual within the accelerator, because that kind of is also relevant for the application process. I am one individual within a large team, right? So Cronos Labs is nearly 100-person organization, and within that there's a huge spectrum of different skill sets and minds that help projects and that help scale and grow the Cronos network. So it's really important that when we're assessing teams, we're looking at it through the lens of, both product development, community growth, the strategic partnership with crypto.com. There's lots of ways that we assess and look at a founder and their proposition that kind of feeds back to the organization at large. So yes, certainly it's not just me. There is a full team, and it's quite a rigorous process. So we will interview all founders that are shortlisted, often many times, and then we will kind of assess across different criteria where we see them falling, and also the composition of the cohort, right? So what we think would be a really great mix of different verticals and bringing different ideas and strengths to the network.
Well, so you mentioned those biases or unconscious biases even. I remember someone commented maybe a decade ago, all you had to do to raise money in Silicon Valley was be a 20-something white male in a dark hoodie with some sort of idea, and you could raise money. How do you overcome those kind of heuristics, which sometimes can be helpful? And you mentioned having a diverse team of people actually feeding into the outcome, but how much of it is like the hard quantitative data, and how much of it is qualitative? You go, there's just something about this team that I think is great, or there's just something about this team that I think is off. How much of that plays into it?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And I think there's just a reality that, everyone has unconscious biases, whether we like it or not. Just everyone's ideas and views are shaped by their own experiences. And that's what makes it, what makes them have a great point of view and a perspective on teams. But equally, it's really important to have diversity in terms of the way that people think and their experiences, so that we can make sure that we're not missing out on any great opportunities, and we're seeing all of the potential. And so I think just to answer directly, I think it's super important for any investment committee or any selection process to have a mix of different mindsets and experience, particularly for us, because it's a remote program, and so we're looking for teams all around the world, solving problems for all types of different user. So it's critical that we are looking at it from we've got a cross section of jurisdictions and backgrounds and all sorts of things. So that's certainly at the forefront of how we make both, and we assess both qualitatively and quantitatively, right? So we score teams on a specific matrix, but then also look at them, the founder fit when we meet them, and we understand the team dynamics, and all of those things play into that decision-making process.
And I'd imagine that you'd get pretty good at the qualitative, that kind of gut feeling even sometimes, where you've assessed hundreds and maybe thousands and thousands of projects over the years. And so, you get very good at compiling data and actually being able to assess the hard data part. But that qualitative part, I think, is not a superpower so much, but it is certainly more unique. And to actually be able to make those calls and see them come through, especially maybe if you're taking a risk on some, I think, that can make all the difference between having okay returns or an okay project and a really amazing project. So I think that's a tricky seat to sit in, Charlotte.
I mean, I think, look, certainly I wouldn't profess to have any kind of secret sauce. I think, that's what every investment committee is looking for. That balance, and I think that you're right. There probably is some gut feel. I mean, certainly we really do rigorously look at what the product is and look under the hood, understand how they're building it, all of those things. But one of the things that I've learned kind of over the last 5-6 years in assessing teams is that actually high conviction either way. So if individuals within the kind of investment committee think, oh, this is incredible, I'm totally all in on this idea, or vice versa, they kind of I hate it, I absolutely hate it, this just is total trash. That having that really broad spectrum of views in terms of conviction is actually is actually one of the indicators of success, in the sense that those projects often really stand out. And if they're standing out to an investment committee, either way, I mean, I think if everyone really strongly doesn't think it's great, then that's probably a clear sign that it
could not be great.
It's not right at that point, but it doesn't mean it wouldn't be in the future. But if there is that wrestle of I suppose desire to bring that team in or to work with them, if there's individuals who feel very strongly either way, that's often a really great sign that that project has something, and it's a case where we want to learn more and we want to find out more about that team, because those polarizing views can be really powerful to galvanize community and to bring people on board of the journey.
Yeah, the old thing Seth Godin used to call it the purple cow. You're driving along the road and you see a purple cow, you're like, wow, that's remarkable. It's a purple cow. You don't see it every day. And what I mean, Could I hear what you're saying and translate it as it would be if I'm not confident of standing out on my merits, should I then try to go the other way and, I don't know, be remarkable in some sort of contrarian kind of way just to stand out? Is that, you mentioned, have high conviction either direction. Maybe is there some incentive then, if you can't be the high conviction man, these guys are definitely going to make it. Maybe could you be the high conviction, there's a massive risk, but it could be worthwhile.
I mean, look, honestly, I would say ultimately, utility is king, right? Like, or queen. It's like, ultimately there has to be usefulness. Like, that's just like fundamental, right? And the more you can prove that usefulness and that utility in the product, and like I said, kind of solving for that acute pain, that is far and away the most important thing, and showing a reduction in executional risk. So being able to show traction, being able to show to, whether that's investors or users or partners, that you have a product that is going to deliver on what you're saying it's going to do in that useful way. I mean, that really is like far and away the highest the highest factor in any assessment. But I suppose just as a more the conviction piece is more just a kind of interesting insight in terms of when just like a common theme that I've seen over the last couple of years is that it is the teams that have that kind of just a point of difference. And again, and it comes back to doing something different, solving problems in an innovative and an interesting way. And also, I think as well, I kind of touched on community in my previous answer, and I think that's it as well. It's like when you're saying something which is really has a different point of view, it brings community on board, because it kind of gets people emotionally invested in it, as well as, okay, this is actually just a really cool idea and can solve my problems.
So what are some of those problems that you are seeing being solved at the moment? What is attracting community at the moment? And then I also want to ask later, like, what are you hoping to see solved over the next, couple of months or years? But firstly, just with the current kind of crop and just in your own experience recently looking at the market, what are some of the present pain points that are being solved, or at least attempting to be solved?
Sure. I mean, I find this hard to distill down just because there's always so much happening. I think, this year there's been some kind of macro trends that I think it would be amiss to not talk to. So obviously one of them is AI, right? So I feel like it's kind of crept up on us overnight, and I suppose it's crept up mainstream, right? We've been talking about AI plus blockchain certainly since I started working in the space. At Outlier, we're working with teams like Fetch.ai and Notion Protocol, who had kind of that as their core thesis. So it's certainly not been there, but I think the kind of mainstream presence has just kind of really, really exploded, and I think that's just caught the attention of so many founders, and they're trying to use that to leverage that idea and leverage that new trend to build and kind of iterate on ideas in a new and interesting way. So I think that's kind of one of the areas that we've been looking at for the Accelerator, and certainly is super exciting. So I think that's one area. I think maybe the other thing that's like would be amiss to not mention is really the role of enterprise. This year, I feel like there's just been this huge both inflow of capital and interest, but also actually, I think what I've seen in the last year or so is actual traction. So enterprise projects and corporations who are actually wanting to test the technology and really integrate with protocols and new tech in a way that was much more conceptual previously. So that's translated in lots of different ways, but I suppose we're seeing projects that are really wrestling with, I don't know, like loyalty programs or content creation, or helping onboard enterprise in lots of different ways. So I think that's there come up some of the kind of macro areas, but then and maybe I'll pause there. But then I suppose just we could drill down into each vertical. I mean, like I said, there is just so much here. It's hard to kind of distill.
If we look at just enterprise, for example, one of the things that I've been noticing probably over the last 3 to 6 months, maybe since the end of last year, is in the kind of podcast world, or at least mainstream news, and then a few concentric circles into, the regular kind of podcasting world and streaming world. People saying that crypto's dead. It's over, pack your bags, go home. But what I'm hearing you say is actually that might be kind of the noise, but what's actually happening is enterprises moving into, or at least playing with in the playground or sandbox of Web3. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think there's so many examples of this. You see Nike with their kind of .swoosh, their Web3 platform, and the acquisition of Artifact, so many big names, Starbucks, and their loyalty program, and even more like on the kind of institutional side in the kind of banking world, like you've got JP Morgan playing around with lots of different things. There's really a lot of scope, I think, for enterprise to be entering the space in a much more real way. How they interact with protocols is to be seen, but certainly I think that there is much more interest in actually kind of practically working with the technology rather than kind of just wanting to learn and understand it theoretically, that we've seen in the last year or so.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think this is my favorite time, because the noise is the hype has died down, and actual builders can get on with the business of building. And I think by the time the next kind of hype cycle starts up again, or the next bull run starts up again, we'll actually see a lot of this testing materialize into the real world usage that you've been alluding to. I think that's that's my perspective on that as well. When you mentioned AI, we can't, it doesn't seem like you can go through any kind of conversation without talking about AI at the moment. How is that? I mean, obviously, from a project perspective, you've already mentioned, working with projects, working in this arena. And I think you're right. Its time has come, mostly because, I mean, we've all seen people working on AI for a number of years, but when OpenAI launched Chat 3, all of a sudden, everybody who's been working on AI was forced to say, oh yeah, we're ready to go to market as well. Some demonstrably more ready than others, if you read the news. But it's certainly brought AI right into the mainstream and into the headlines. How is that impacting your day-to-day, or how's it impacting how you're viewing the next couple of months and couple of years? Let's start there, because there's a lot we could talk about with AI.
Gosh, yeah, it's I mean, it's a huge piece, right? And I think, like I said, that that interplay of AI and blockchain is super powerful, and we're starting to see it come through in a lot of the applications and the early stage teams that we're talking to. But I mean, I think the scope of that is just going to kind of explode in the next 6 to 9 months. It's crazy, and like you said, kind of in the footsteps of ChatGPT, like that broad scale generative AI, it really is going to just revolutionize content creation. And I think particularly powerful for Web3 is like that how that will empower communities, and how machines and humans are going to kind of transact with each other, and how like those identities will evolve and cross over, govern themselves and their data. It's super interesting to see that the power of those two technologies and how they I suppose how they intersect, and that proposition, both for founders but also for investors, I think will be incredibly attractive. So yes, just super excited to see. I was actually talking to a team yesterday who are kind of, like you can see it coming through. So like in as an example with DeFi, right? With yield farming, this team is looking at using AI for users to kind of go like deposit the stable coins in my wallet into the highest generating pool. And suddenly it's like, oh, wow, you kind of starting to translate those concepts into very practical tools for users in the space. So yeah, I think it's really interesting and very exciting. Maybe just one point I wanted to make, just you mentioned in your kind of intro to that question, just about the current timing for builders at the moment, right? And I just wanted to kind of highlight that, because I think it's really, really important. Just in that, there is this incredible technology overload of like all of this cool stuff that founders can play around with, but also and you said like bear markets are kind of your favorite time. I really agree. Having been through kind of certainly 2018, where we'd had the bull market of 2017, and actually teams had these treasuries, but actually ETH price crashed, and so there wasn't still the same amount of interest and capital to be deployed. And looking back even further, like 2015, that bear market, like again, like it was really a struggle, even for the unicorns of today, to make traction and to scale in a way that was meaningful, just because there was such a lack of mainstream knowledge and money. But today, and like you said, that there's kind of like people saying, oh, crypto's dead, or, enterprise have been very dismissive of the space. But actually, I kind of, contrary to that, I think it's actually the most brilliant time for builders, in the sense that, a lot of the primitives and the fundamentals have been set, and there is really so much cool stuff that they can pull on. So, social fi is something that I'm really bullish on for the year ahead. And like, you look at what like Lens Protocol, Ceramic, Live Peer, there's so many great initiatives that could be leveraged, that take away some of that executional risk that builders can leverage. So there's so many great primitives that are already set. But then on top of that, there is it's much easier to find signal of product market fit. So, when there isn't so many speculators in the market, you've got this ability to kind of test and learn features and try out your product in a way that will, you can very quickly see green shoots, and you can quickly see, okay, there is some real interest here that we can kind of double down on in terms of our product and fine tuning the proposition of it. And then finally, like, there is a lot of interest, right? Both from enterprise, which I touched on, but also there's lots of funds that have raised capital and have it ready to deploy. It's just finding the right fit, and some of that, those diligence processes might be longer and slower than they would be in a more buoyant market. But that being said, there is I certainly think it's a great time to build on AI or whatever that might be for the relevant team.
Yeah, and money finds good projects as well that have good product market fit or have good founding teams. The people who have tenacity. Money finds them, and although there's less money looping around at the moment, there are also less. I think it's easier to stand out now than it is in a bull market, and there's heaps of noise, and it's hard to cut through.
Absolutely, I think that's exactly right. You do stand out. You can really see those teams, and I think you're right. Like, great teams certainly don't struggle to be well capitalized. So yeah, I think in summary, it's a great time to build.
Yeah, well, tell me about Social Fi. What's exciting about Social Fi specifically, seeing as you singled that one out?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, right? Because, and I think just back to the kind of core proposition of Cronos and what we're trying to do, right, is on board many millions of non-crypto consumers, right? And I think one of the ways to do that is using fun and using engaging and interesting applications, so that they can kind of test and learn and interact with their own network, right? And I think GameFi and SocialFi have been kind of in the space for a long time, right? So there's been lots of projects that that you and I could name that have kind of tested some of this stuff out. But I think now what is I suppose different for SocialFi is that there is lots of great primitives and lots of great concepts and projects that you could leverage. So I touched on Lens protocol, but the idea that you could effectively port your social graph from one application to the next, I mean, it's kind of revolutionary. Like it's really, really powerful. And I think, for teams that are looking to bootstrap and to kind of immediate, because the big challenge with SocialFi is acquisition of users, right? It's being able to get traction and being able to kind of scale the network in a way that's going to drive any kind of network effects when you're up against platforms that have literally millions, billions of users. But actually I think that curated communities, curated content is the direction of travel. And actually that, on top of being able to incentivize content creators and be able to pay them in a kind of fast and transparent way, is a very attractive proposition. And so I think it's an interesting time. I mean, there is still unquestionably huge amounts of executional risk for these teams, because it's hard. It's a really hard challenge. And that's why there is currently so much, consolidation, and the power is in the hands of a very small number of players at the moment. But I'm quite bullish on that area, because I think it has the ability to onboard a huge number of individuals and users to the space at a time when there is a lot of great fundamental set that teams can leverage to kind of help reduce that executional risk.
Yeah, and I think when an average user, so the proverbial grandma, can port her without having to go and get a wallet and write down her seed phrase or any of that kind of stuff, when she can utilize this kind of technology in a seamless kind of, as if it's Web 2, but it's all built on Web 3 and on blockchain, I think that's when we'll start to see these projects really start to take off. I really like that incentivized creators and curated communities being the future. I think there's some really there's some gold there, I think, as well. And even just with the current trajectory of people wanting to own their data, this feeds into all of those kinds of things as well. It's a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting on that control your data, right? Because absolutely that is a very powerful sentiment. But I don't know, I'm not sure it's kind of been a strong enough pull yet, until there is like real acute pain that we talked about. And suddenly people are like, oh, actually this does really impact me and my life. And actually that's what we're starting to see. And so all of those trends and themes are kind of culminating, and I think I think that could be an interesting area.
It's that old marketing technique of show me, don't tell me. And so when they can actually see it working, they see the benefit, they can actually kind of put their hands on it and say, oh, this is actually beneficial for me. Just like perhaps nobody was really looking for the mobile phone until they saw the iPhone, or the smartphone, I should say. Very few people, maybe just some early adopters, but then the iPhone came about, and all of a sudden, bam, apps became a multi-billion dollar industry. And then, Web3 as well. It feels like it's a slower burn trying to get people to actually understand it, because the bar is so high to actually get into blockchain and Web3. And if you're not a coder, or at least have some sort of dev experience or are willing to learn, it's actually hard to get into it. But my hope is some of these social things will be able to kind of lower that bar, or just make it transparent.
Yeah, and just more accessible. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that's it. And there's lots of ways that teams could do it. Like I said, I think really like DeFi has been the biggest pull, and then some of the GameFi applications have been very strong as well. But actually, SocialFi hasn't really had its day yet. And so, yeah, I'm I'm interested in seeing how that plays out this year as well.
You can. I'll just. So as I look around the companies, the projects that I'm working with, who I'm either consulting with or advising for, or that come across my desk for potential investment, all those kinds of things, the thing that I rarely see are female founders in the Web3 space. I'm by no means asking you to speak on behalf of all women everywhere, but because you have had a lot of success and you've become an influential person in this space, why do you think it's so, is it difficult? Why do you think there are so few women working in the Web3 space at the moment? And I want to acknowledge there are women working in the Web3 space, obviously, and doing really well, but the ratio is right down.
No. And look, I think, so there's a couple of things there, right? I think, first and foremost, I would say, and you kind of mentioned it, like, there are so many more women working in the space, and I can only see, since I kind of came in, and I remember being at ETH Berlin in 2018, and I think that I remember it was probably one of the only times in my lives I've felt it just such stark contrast, and being like, wow, I really am outnumbered here. And now I go to, I was at Paris Blockchain Week 2-3 weeks ago, and like, it's just totally different. It feels just like the space has evolved so much in that sense. Like, there is so many people of all kinds of backgrounds, but so many more women in the space, and I think that speaks to its growth and it being more accessible, and actually just a lot of progress in general. So I think, on a really positive note, there's been a huge amount of headway, and I think that's only going from strength to strength. That being said, certainly, I think the latest stats were somewhere between like 10 and 20% of the Web3 workforce are women. So there's clearly work to be done. That goes without saying. But I don't think it's massively out of line with the broader tech industry, and so really we are in a space which is the kind of bleeding edge. It's like a subset of a subset. It's innovation, and then we're kind of innovating on that. And so I think, because of that, it just means that that it can be a bit inaccessible, and I think that it's really important that that we are as kind of like we're as open in every way, and heroing and highlighting great female founders, great individuals in the space who are doing brilliant things as much as possible, so that women, but also like I said, with our accelerator, it's very much global. It's very much looking at all sorts of backgrounds and bringing everyone in, rather than it being like but rather than kind of trying to specifically say, well, how do we cater for women, but how do we cater for just diversity of thought in general, so that we can build really rich and strong communities.
Yeah, it's really good. So in terms of, so you see it as not a self-correcting problem, but more women are already entering in the space, you're saying, over the last couple of years, either chasing the opportunity or because it meets their particular skill sets, or just as women become more recognized, I guess, in their fields. What are some of the things that maybe VCs or gatekeepers or founders can do to help in this area?
I think there's a range of things, right? I think one of the things is to make sure that great female projects and individuals are heroed and highlighted. So, and there's so much great stuff here. Like, there's some great communities. So, some of the older, more established ones like World of Women, but also like new and up and coming ones like Unicorn DAO, or ironically named Boys Club DAO. There's so many really cool and really great groups of individuals that make up both men and women, right? But that are just that I think that should be heroed for that kind of inclusivity, and that they're I think that's an important one. So just heroing and highlighting them, and then I think actually there is some like quite tactical things. So one thing that I found in the past in terms of recruitment, and hiring and scaling your team, is that sometimes the language that can be used can be have gender biases. So it's important to make sure that the way that you're targeting and recruiting is really open, and you're really looking for communities and pools of individuals that encompass all sorts of different backgrounds. And like I said, that could be, different markets or different jurisdictions, or just different, whether that just different pools of people really that you can pull on and make sure that you've got different experiences in the pipeline. Other ways that you could do it, hearing them. I think they're really the key ways. I think, like I said, it's just, as well as having, when you have any selection process or investment committee, having that diversity of thought and being aware that everyone will have forms of unconscious bias, and so that you're catering for different backgrounds and you're bringing different schools of thought to the table.
Yeah, awesome. I really appreciate your thoughts on that. Thank you. Hey, Charlotte, if someone wants to find out more about Cronos Labs, about your accelerator, or to hear more from you, where can they find you on the internet?
Yeah, so absolutely. Like for Cronos, the website's probably the best platform for all of the loads of great knowledge. So Cronos.org, and you can sign up to the newsletter for kind of regular updates, or all of our social channels. So Twitter, Discord, LinkedIn, all of the and Telegram, all of the usual places. And then me personally, you can follow me on Twitter at Charlotte Kapoor, and also find me on LinkedIn as well.
All right, Charlotte, thanks again for joining us today. I think it's going to be a really eye-opening and insightful podcast, especially for founders watching, but for everyone in general. So thanks again.
Pleasure. Lovely to speak to you.
Thanks for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed this episode of Off Chain with Charlotte Kapoor. We love bringing you great guests like Charlotte. We hope we inspired you. Hope you've learned more about Web3, about technology, about the future, and in particular today from Charlotte, what it takes to be a successful startup founder in 2023. As always, like, subscribe, and better yet, share this episode with a friend. Help us spread the word, and join us again next week for another great episode of Off Chain with me, Don Redden. Until then, take care.